Hello and welcome to the Bucketlister Podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford, along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. I am your host, Keith Crockford, and today I'm answering a question that I got asked the other day. And I had a phone call with someone about, is it cheaper to book a Everest Base Camp trek and do everything myself? And of course, the answer to that question is yes, it is. If you're going to go and do something like this, you're going to be able to shop around and, you're going to organize it all yourself and there's no one to pay. So yes, it is going to be cheaper. And it got me thinking, and I just thought, I'm going to record a podcast on this and look at, if you were to book this yourself, how much the costs would be. Now, an Everest Base Camp trip with us is around about £2,200, not including your international flights. And I'm going to put all of this into perspective and just give you some research that I've done on what is the cost of doing this. Now, obviously, your international flight is something that you're going to need to consider within your budget of your Everest Base Camp trek. Now, you can book an international flight and add this onto the package with us. And I just had a quick look for next season. I mean, since COVID, flights have gone up massively. And I just did a look for what a flight would be for kind of next April for next season for an Everest Base Camp. Your options are, you've got lots of options. There's no direct flights to Kathmandu, but you have got, you've got Qatar, you've got Emirates, you've got Etihad, you've got Air India. So you've got lots of different choices to get you to Kathmandu itself. And if I look at the cost for these, you're looking round about, the cheapest option is about £700. However, we charge our flights in it around about £1,000-1,200 is where we are for our flights, which may seem like a massively big difference, but the cheapest flight is £700, is a 29-hour flight and includes a 10-hour layover. The best option on currently what I'm looking at is around £1,100, and that's for a 16-hour flight. And the quickest way of getting to Kathmandu is a 13-hour flight, which is £1,800. So there's a huge difference between the 700 and the 1,800, but there is also an 18-hour difference in flight time on there. So, you can do it a lot cheaper if you're happy for it to take you 30 hours to get to your destination, rather than potentially, as we would look at, kind of the standard Qatar Emirates flight is round about between 14 and 16 hours, depending on which direction you are going in. For example, on the way out, it's all on layovers, but generally you're looking at around 14 hours on the way out, 16 hours on the way back for a standard Qatar Emirates sort of flight into Doha or into Dubai. So obviously we're not talking about the cost of that, we're talking about the cost of the trek, but I just thought I would include that at the start of this podcast, just so you can see that actually, you may think, oh, hang on a minute, they're charging that for a flight, I can get it cheaper. Yes, you can get it cheaper. But when we're booking group flights, we're not booking 30-hour with 12-hour layovers. We're trying to book the best flight we can get for the money in terms of that. So once you arrive into Kathmandu, you're going to need to get probably to Thamel, which is where most people stay for a couple of nights before they head out on their trek. And we include our transfer in that. If you're on one of our group trips, on one of our Bucketlister Plus trips, the transfers are included. Obviously, the cheapest way of doing it is to walk out the airport, find a taxi, and get them to take you. But I know a lot of people would rather have pre-booked their transfer to get into the centre, knowing that there's somebody there waiting for them and going from there. Other costs you need to consider, which aren't included either in our package, but you would need to consider it, is your visa cost, which is $50 when you get into Kathmandu Airport. Everyone would have to pay that anyway. And that's just an additional cost that you would have to consider. Obviously, if you are you're going to stay in Kathmandu, there are plenty of options of accommodation to stay. You can have everything from a hostel from £10 a night to over £100 a night in a 5-star hotel. So we stay in a really nice hotel, good location in Thamel. I really love going to the hotel we stay in. And, you know, it's not the cheapest, it's not the most expensive. It's a nice, comfortable hotel in a good location. But you would just need to consider that, you know, you're going to probably have several nights pre-trip and several nights post-trip to include into the cost as well. Heading out onto your trip, obviously we've discussed, we've done a couple of podcasts recently on Everest Base Camp and looking at the flights from Lukla and flights from Kathmandu, and I'm not going to go into loads of details with that. I'll put a link in the show notes to those podcasts, so you can catch up on those if you've missed them. But at the minute, majority, if not all of the flights are still continuing to fly from Ramchap, and you would need to make your way down to Ramchap to get your flight to Lukla. If you don't want to do that, you've still got the possibility of a helicopter direct from Kathmandu. You would be looking at round about $3,000 to take you in a helicopter if you wanted to do it that way, if you didn't want to take the 140 kilometer drive down to Ramchap. Options to get to Ramchap: you've got private jeeps, buses, or local buses. Journey costs are anything from £15 to £25 on a local bus, up to having your own private vehicle, where you'll be looking at somewhere around about £120 to £155 each way for a private vehicle to take you down to Ramchap. Obviously, again, if you book a package, that's all included in the costs. We offer, a lot of people will go down to Ramchap overnight and drive overnight. We like to go during the day, and we include a night in Ramchap beforehand. We just think it's nicer to wake up fresher. Even though it's an early morning start, you still get to sleep in a bed, and then get up and then head to Ramchap the following morning. So again, there could be an additional cost there, that if you are on a local bus, you might need another night's accommodation in Ramchap. Ramchap isn't very big and doesn't have a great deal of accommodation available either. So pre-booking is certainly advised on that one. In terms of your flight costs, it's around about $170. So anything between £140 to get from Ramchap to Lukla. So you're looking at about a £280, £300 return flight is what you would need for there. Obviously, we've talked about contingency plans as well, and what you would need from a money perspective to make sure that, you know, if you can't fly fixed wing plane from Ramchap, then it might be that either on the way there, on the way back, you may need to get a helicopter. We've discussed helicopter flights, but just as a guide, a helicopter will take 5 people, and the cost is about $2,500, and plus VAT at 13%, and that gets split between up to a maximum of 5 people that can go in the helicopter. But if you are flying group of 2 people and you've got your local guide with you, you'll have to take them with you as well. So you would have to cover, unless you could find 2 people to fill your helicopter, you would have to cover that whole cost yourselves with regards to that. So just bear that in mind. And obviously we talked about, you can use your fixed wing refund to go towards the cost of your helicopter as well. So if booking with us, that is taken off the cost of your flight, and you pay the helicopter company the remainder of the bill. To do Everest Base Camp, you're going to need to have some permits. And you're going to need your Khumbu local entrance fee permit, which is around about $20. And you can get this in Lukla, you can get this in Kathmandu, or you can get this in Monjo. Obviously, if you're booking with a trekking company, this is already done for you. You will also need your national park entry permit. This is around $30. And again, this can be obtained in Kathmandu or in Monjo at the park entrance. Again, if you are trekking with on an organized trek with a company, this will have already been done for you prior to you getting there. So you haven't got to worry about any of your permits. But if you are traveling on your own, then you're going to need to worry about doing that yourselves as well. Big question we get asked is about food on an Everest Base Camp trek, and we include the cost of all the meals within our package. A lot of other companies, when they advertise their Everest Base Camp trip, they will say to you, or they'll say on their website in the small print, that you need to allow $300-400 addition for the food on the trek itself. We just allow people to order off the menu, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You order what you want, and then the bill is just paid. And from our perspective, it's a lot better. I've seen groups before, and I've discussed this on the podcast, where you will get to a tea house, you're in your group, and then they bring out one bill at the end, and you've got to sit there and split the bill. It's okay for the first couple of days, but after a while, that gets super tedious. And also as well, it means that you've got to have enough cash to cover that whilst you're on the trek. I say that you probably need around, from a UK perspective, it will cost you about £25 per day. So about £300 for your 3 meals whilst you're on the 13-day trek. And you'll need to have this in local currency if you're traveling on your own. Like I said, we just include it in the price, and you don't need to worry about it. So when you're comparing prices online, just see what the inclusions are, because this is obviously quite a big one in terms of an additional cost. The other thing to consider is drinking water. You can't drink from the taps in Nepal. Bottled water is very, very expensive. The higher you go up, the more money it costs. Obviously, you'd need to be drinking kind of 4 liters of water a day. That water has been flown in, trekked up. So the higher you go up, the more a bottle of water costs, which is one reason why we advise our clients to take a water to go bottle with you. And then at that point, you can just fill it from a tap, and it's perfectly safe, and you don't need to be buying bottled water on the trek itself. So it's a good way of saving some money with a water to go bottle. Accommodation on the trek, obviously, again, is all included with a package. If you are staying in tea houses, they will cost you anything between kind of $7.50 to $15 per night, depending on where you are and the location. Tea houses are generally cheap because they want you to eat the meals in the tea house. Obviously, if you don't eat the meals in the tea house, then they will probably charge you more per night for your accommodation. If you're in Namche, for example, and you're going to go out and eat in a local place in Namche, they will probably charge you more because they do expect you to eat in the tea house itself. So you're kind of looking at anything between kind of like £5 and £12 a night for accommodation. One thing I will say though is, obviously, if you pre-book your accommodation, that's all fine. But obviously, with what we've had this autumn season, is we've had lots of delays on flights. So, you due to fly on a Friday, actually you don't end up flying to a Sunday. You've pre-booked all your accommodation for the trek. What are you then going to do? How are you then going to move it if you were traveling on your own? So sometimes traveling in a group, you haven't got to worry about that because that's all been dealt for you. Other costs then, a local guide will cost you between £30 and £40 per day to have a local guide with you. Obviously, most people want to trek with a local guide. Obviously, they will also help you deal with all of the booking of the accommodation if you haven't pre-booked it. If there's any problems, they will also help you with that. And obviously, a lot of people will want to have a porter with them as well to carry their bags. And they're going to cost you round about £15 per day for the porter. Now, it doesn't sound a lot, £15 a day. It's going to be £200 for the trek. But, which some people might go, oh, actually, that is quite a bit of money. But as I always say to people, if I asked you to carry your duffel bag for the first day, I think you would soon end up finding the money to pay a porter to carry your bag and have a more enjoyable trek. I always laugh when we're with our groups and, the porters stop with the bags. And one of the group asks if they can try carrying the bag up. And you see how far they get. And obviously they carry it on a strap on their head. And it's pulling down on the neck, and it is really tough. And I think, if you had to carry that bag up that trek, you would soon be happy to hand over the money to the porter to do that for you. So when you look at all of those costs that I've just said, so you're looking at £200 for a private transfer to Ramchap, you're looking at around about £320 for your return flights. You're looking at £120 for your tea house accommodation, £300 for your meals, up to £500 for your local guide. You've got your permits, which are around £40, and then you've got £200 for your Sherpa as well. That comes out to round about £1,750 roughly for the 13-day trip, looking at all of those costs. And, like I said, our trip is around about £2,200. So £450 difference. However, we have got our pre-nights, post-nights accommodation in Kathmandu. We do local guided tours in Kathmandu. We have our transfers from the airport to the hotel return. And then obviously you've got someone organizing all this for you and sorting it out. So when you look at the difference in the packages, there isn't a great deal there. Like I say, yes, you can do it cheaper. And obviously it might be that you think, well, I'm not going to spend £25 on my food. I'm going to eat, not eat that much or whatever. So there are ways of doing it cheaper. But I think, the whole point of this podcast is to sort of say, well, that's the normal price if you're going to go and do it on your own. And then if you are going to go and book it with a trekking company, then, there isn't a great deal of difference between the two. I also think as well, we pay our guides very, very well. And I think if you are looking at other prices and you think, well, actually, I could get a guide for £200 for the 12, 13 days, I would just say, well, actually, why would you pay someone that little amount of money for 13 days? The standard is this. These people need to eat as well. These people need to do all of these things and feed their families. And, I think as part of this, and, we're just going through our B Corp at the minute. And one of the things is making sure that, we are looking after the teams that we work with and they are earning a fair wage. And, to us, that's super important. And that is in our costings really. But, as you can see, the price isn't a great deal different, whether you go and do all that yourself. And of course, if you do go and do all that yourself, you've got all the hassle of booking all the individual accommodations, sorting everything out, doing it all. Whereas booking it with a company, you know that that's all been done for you and you haven't got to worry about it. What happens if your flight is cancelled due to weather? How do I sort out rebooking it for the next day? What happens if I'm in Ramchap and I've booked one night and now I can't fly and there's no accommodation? Who's going to sort that out for you? So in these situations where you're on a trip like an Everest Base Camp trip, having that backup, I think, is super important. So that's the reason why I recorded this podcast today. I'm not saying it's right to travel one way or the other. It could be that, you want to travel independently, and that's completely fine. I love traveling independently. If I'm booking our family holiday, I book things independently. But if I was going to go and do a trip like an Everest Base Camp trek, then I would definitely be wanting to have things booked for me in advance without me having to worry about it. Going on my family holiday is a little bit different, booking my own transfer and booking my flights and booking my hotel separately. There's not a lot of moving parts. I'm going to the same place for 2 weeks. Whereas on a trip like this, with lots of moving parts, lots of things that can go wrong, having somebody else, that might not necessarily be the bucket list company. That might be another company you're booking with. And, the whole point of this podcast is it's not about bucket list trips, or it's about bucket list trips, but not about bucket list company trips. There are plenty of other companies out there. We're here. I'm just trying to provide information and research to people, for you guys to make your own decisions. And I'm hopefully that these podcasts are useful, whether you've booked with us or whether you've booked with other companies. We're not here to kind of just sell bucket, you've got to book with a bucket list company. Like, we appreciate that people travel with different companies. They've used different companies for years. They're happy with the company they use. And you might just have stumbled across this podcast. And I don't want it to be the bucket list company buy from us. I want this podcast to be interesting, informative, and hopefully give you inspiration to go and do these trips. Obviously, if you do want to book with us, that's great. But, that's not the reason for this podcast. I do want to sort of say that there are other companies out there. I know lots of other companies out there. I know owners of other companies out there who still offer really, really good trips. And we're not the only ones. And do your research and decide who you want to travel with. Obviously, great if you come with us, but that's not the purpose of this podcast. It's not although it's the Bucketlister podcast, there are other companies out there. Anyway, that's why I wanted to record this podcast today. We got asked the question, we got asked about the costs and justifying the costs. And I just thought, what a great sort of reason for a podcast to kind of do the research and explain the differences in prices and how much things cost. Obviously, you guys can go and do your own research and make your own decision. But I just wanted to kind of, as I'd done the research and looked at it, I thought I would share it with you guys. Anyway, well, that's all from me this week. I hope you found this interesting. I've hoped it's given you some insights. And I'll be back next week with another episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. But until then, thanks very much. And goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucketlister Podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.